During dinner, she slid me a post. "You're temporary." I added, "So is this meal?" Paid and left with the waitress. I thought I knew Hazel after 4 years together, but apparently I'd been living in a completely different relationship than she was. I'm Carter, 36, and I make my living teaching people how to survive in the wilderness around Boulder, Colorado. Not exactly a glamorous profession, but it's honest work that I'm genuinely passionate about, and it pays well enough that I inherited my grandfather's mountain cabin debt-free and could afford to take Hazel to nice places when she wanted to celebrate something. That Thursday night, I'd chosen Blackstone Steakhouse in downtown Boulder because Hazel had been hinting about wanting to go somewhere special for weeks. I figured after 4 years together, we'd earned the right to celebrate at a place with cloth napkins and wine that cost more than my daily rate. I was thinking about our future, maybe even considering proposing within the next year or so, when she completely blindsided me with a yellow post-it note that changed everything. We were halfway through our entrees when she started chatting with the couple at the next table about their recent engagement, gushing about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations with the kind of enthusiasm she'd never shown when we talked about our own future. I was cutting into my ribeye, half listening to her animated conversation about destination weddings, when she casually reached into her purse and pulled out a small yellow square of paper. She slid it across the white tablecloth toward me without missing a beat in her conversation, like she was passing me the salt. The post-it had 4 words written in her neat handwriting: "You're temporary." I stared at those words for a solid 10 seconds, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I was reading. She was still laughing and talking with strangers about true love and forever commitments while simultaneously telling me I was disposable. The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked up at her animated face, watching her perform this version of herself that apparently had no room for me in her long-term plans, and something just clicked into place. I wasn't angry or hurt in that moment, just incredibly clear about what needed to happen next. I pulled out my own pen, wrote, "So is this meal," on the same post, and slid it back to her. She glanced down, and I watched her face change from confusion to shock to something that looked like panic. "Carter, what are you doing?" she whispered, finally acknowledging my existence. "Exactly what you suggested," I said calmly, signaling our waitress Penny over to our table. Penny approached with that professional smile server's perfect, probably expecting us to order dessert or ask for the check. "Hi, could I get the check please? And actually, this might sound strange, but would you be interested in getting coffee after your shift? Somewhere that serves people who actually want to be there." Penny looked between Hazel's horrified expression and my completely serious face, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Sure," she said after a moment, clearly intrigued by whatever drama was unfolding at table 12. "I get off at 10. "Perfect. I'll wait by the front entrance." I handed Penny my card for the check, which came to $180 for a meal Hazel had barely touched because she was too busy networking with engaged strangers. Hazel was frantically whispering my name, her previous confidence completely evaporated as she realized this wasn't going according to whatever script she'd prepared. The couple at the next table had stopped talking about centerpieces and was now openly staring at our table, clearly sensing they were witnessing some kind of relationship explosion. "You can't just leave me here," Hazel hissed, her voice getting higher with each word. "Watch me," I said, standing up and putting on my jacket. "Enjoy explaining this to your new friends." I walked out of Blackstone Steakhouse at 8:45 that evening, leaving behind 4 years of what I'd thought was building toward something permanent, and I've never once regretted that decision. I spent the next hour and 15 minutes at a coffee shop down the street, genuinely enjoying conversation with someone who seemed interested in what I actually did for a living rather than treating it like an embarrassing hobby she tolerated. Penny turned out to be a psychology graduate student at CU Boulder, working part-time at the restaurant while finishing her thesis on trauma recovery through nature-based therapy, which aligned perfectly with some programs I'd been developing for veterans in my wilderness courses. She had this way of asking follow-up questions that showed she was actually listening, something I'd forgotten relationships could include. Meanwhile, my phone was buzzing constantly with increasingly frantic messages from Hazel. The first few were angry, "You embarrassed me in front of complete strangers," and How dare you ask out our waitress like some kind of predator? Then they shifted to confused. I don't understand why you're being so dramatic about a silly note, and we need to talk about this like adults. By the time Penny and I said goodnight around 11:30, Hazel had moved into full panic mode. Where are you? Your truck isn't at the cabin, and this isn't funny anymore, Carter. Call me back immediately. I drove home to my inherited mountain cabin feeling clearer than I had in months, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale properly. The next morning, I did something I'd been putting off for too long. I called a locksmith and had every lock on my property changed, including the gate at the bottom of my driveway. I'd given Hazel a key after our second year together, back when I thought we were building something that would last, but apparently she'd been photographing my survival gear and documenting my property for reasons I was about to discover. When Hazel showed up around noon with her sister Brooklyn and her friend Jasmine, clearly expecting to march in and have some kind of dramatic reconciliation scene, they found themselves locked out and furious. I met them at the gate with a cardboard box containing everything she'd left at my place over the years, plus printed receipts for every piece of gear, furniture, and equipment in my cabin. You can't just change the locks without notice, Brooklyn declared, apparently serving as Hazel's legal advisor despite having no actual legal training. This is probably illegal landlord behavior or something. She doesn't live here, I replied calmly. Never has. Never paid rent, utilities, or contributed to mortgage payments. She's been a guest who's no longer welcome. Hazel was rifling through the box with increasing desperation, clearly looking for items she'd planned to claim as her own. Where's the vintage Coleman lantern collection? And the sleeping bags? Those were gifts from my family. I handed her a folder containing purchase receipts, inheritance documentation, and photos of the gear taken before we'd even met. Every single item in that cabin belongs to me. These receipts show I bought the sleeping bags in 2019, 2 years before we met. The Coleman lanterns belong to my grandfather and are documented in his estate papers. Brooklyn snatched the folder and started reading, her confident expression fading as she realized they had no legal ground to stand on. That's when Jasmine made the mistake that revealed what this was really about. Well, what about all the Instagram content she created using your property? That has to be worth something. She was basically marketing your business for free. Instagram content? I asked, though pieces were already clicking together in my mind. She's been posting photos of your gear and your cabin for months, Jasmine continued, apparently not realizing she was confessing to something. Building her outdoor lifestyle brand. She was going to partner with some companies for sponsored posts once she had enough followers. Brooklyn shot Jasmine a look that could have started forest fires, but the damage was done. Hazel had been using my inherited property and grandfather's vintage equipment as props for social media content, building a fake outdoor persona to attract sponsors, all while secretly planning to leave me for something better. That's actually theft of intellectual property, I said, pulling out my phone. Commercial use of someone else's property without permission or compensation. Interesting business model. Hazel finally spoke up, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. It wasn't like that, Carter. I was trying to help promote your business. Show people how amazing this lifestyle could be. By calling me temporary? I asked. That's an interesting marketing strategy. The three of them left empty-handed that afternoon, taking only the items Hazel could actually prove belonged to her, which turned out to be less than half of what she'd expected to claim. As their car disappeared down my mountain road, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace and quiet. The full scope of Hazel's deception revealed itself 2 days later when I found her tablet tucked behind my couch cushions, apparently forgotten in her rush to collect her belongings. I wasn't planning to snoop, just wanted to return it, but the screen lit up showing her text conversation with someone named Derek, and the preview was enough to stop me cold. Carter's finally served his purpose. The mountain property photos got me 2,400 new followers this month. I sat down and read through months of messages that painted a picture of calculated betrayal I hadn't seen coming. Derek turned out to be her wealthy ex-boyfriend from Denver, some finance executive who'd been funding her lifestyle before we met and apparently was ready to resume that arrangement. Their conversations revealed planning that went back 6 months, with Hazel complaining about my primitive lifestyle, while simultaneously using my cabin and equipment for what she called authentic outdoor content creation. "This place is perfect for building my brand," she'd texted Derek in March. "Rustic enough to look adventurous, but close enough to civilization that I don't actually have to rough it. Once I hit 5,000 followers, I can start charging for sponsored posts and save enough to make the transition." Derek had replied, "Just remember our deal. You document the outdoor lifestyle angle for 6 months, build your social media presence, then move to the penthouse. I need someone who can represent my brand at corporate events, not someone who actually wants to live in the mountains." The messages showed she'd been meeting Derek during her supposed work conferences in Denver, staying at his downtown penthouse while telling me she was attending marketing seminars. Photos showed them at expensive restaurants and private clubs, with Hazel captioning them, "researching luxury hospitality trends for client presentations," when she posted them publicly, while privately texting Derek about practicing for our real life together. But the most revealing conversation happened just 3 days before the posted incident. "I'm getting tired of pretending to enjoy campfires and trail mix," she'd written. "When can I stop this charade?" Derek had responded, "Give him the note we discussed. Make it clear you're moving on. He seems stable enough that he won't cause drama, and you can spin it as outgrowing the relationship naturally." They'd actually planned the post-it note together, calculating that I'd react maturely enough that Hazel could exit without consequences while maintaining her social media narrative about evolving beyond small-town limitations. Within hours of our steakhouse encounter, Hazel had launched a carefully orchestrated social media campaign designed to control the narrative about our breakup. Her Instagram story showed artistic photos of moving boxes with captions like, "Sometimes outgrowing a relationship means outgrowing yourself," and "ready for the next chapter in Denver." She posted photos of us from better times with new captions, "Grateful for the lessons learned in unconventional places," and "Mountain life taught me what I really value, authentic connections and unlimited potential." The most manipulative post featured my grandfather's vintage camping gear with text reading, "Learning to appreciate craftsmanship and history, but also recognizing when it's time to create your own legacy instead of living in someone else's." Then she escalated to more direct attacks, sharing carefully edited screenshots of our text conversations that made me appear controlling and possessive. One post claimed I'd isolated her from career opportunities with a photo of rejection letters from companies, conveniently omitting that those were for positions she'd never actually applied for. Another showed a photo of my locked gate with text about controlling behavior disguised as protection and hashtags about escaping toxic masculinity disguised as outdoor adventure. Her followers began commenting with support for her brave decision to leave an emotionally manipulative situation, and she encouraged the narrative by responding to comments with vague references to walking on eggshells and finally feeling safe to pursue my dreams. But Hazel had miscalculated one crucial factor: Penny. When Penny shared the post-it story with her graduate school classmates during a seminar on healthy relationship boundaries, complete with a photo of the note that I'd kept as a reminder, the story went viral on campus social media within hours. Students began dubbing it the temporary note dump and sharing it as an example of dignified response to public disrespect. Psychology professors started using it in lectures about manipulation tactics and appropriate boundaries. The campus reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of my response, with students commenting on how refreshing it was to see someone handle betrayal with calm dignity instead of dramatic retaliation. While Hazel was trying to paint me as controlling, hundreds of people were praising my restraint and emotional maturity. Her carefully crafted victim narrative was being undermined by actual mental health professionals who recognized her behavior patterns and my appropriate response to them. The viral post-it story reached Hazel's marketing firm within a week, and the consequences were swift and professional. 3 clients recognized her from the campus social media posts and contacted her boss expressing concern about having someone with questionable professional judgment and public behavior issues managing their brand communications. Her supervisor called an emergency meeting where Hazel was suspended pending a full review of her professional conduct standards, specifically regarding social media policies and client confidence protocols. Meanwhile, Her attempts to file a restraining order against me backfired spectacularly when she appeared before a judge claiming I'd been stalking her with aggressive outdoor activities and forcing her into dangerous wilderness situations against her will. The petition included photos of us on backpacking trips, rock climbing expeditions, and camping adventures, which she now characterized as evidence of my controlling nature and reckless disregard for her safety. I brought my own evidence to the hearing, signed waivers she'd completed for every outdoor activity, enthusiastic social media posts she'd made during our adventures with captions like, "Living my best mountain life," and "So grateful for someone who pushes me out of my comfort zone," and text messages where she'd specifically requested certain trips and activities. The judge dismissed her petition within 15 minutes, noting that voluntary participation in recreational activities with documented consent didn't constitute harassment, and suggested she might want to reconsider filing frivolous legal claims that wasted court resources. But the most satisfying professional development was happening with my own business. The viral story had attracted attention from people who appreciated what they saw as old-school integrity and no-nonsense approaches to relationships and business. My wilderness instruction courses were booked solid for the next 4 months, with clients specifically mentioning they'd heard about me through the Post-it Guy story and wanted to work with someone who kept it real. 3 outdoor gear companies reached out about partnership opportunities, interested in associating their brands with someone who demonstrated authentic character under pressure. The Colorado State Park Service offered me a consulting contract to help develop their wilderness safety programs, citing community references about my professional reputation and ethical standards. One client told me directly, "Anyone who handles personal drama with that much class probably runs a business the same way, and that's exactly what I want in a survival instructor." Hazel's response to my professional success was to escalate her legal threats through an attorney who demanded $25,000 for emotional trauma and loss of income opportunities, plus claims to a portion of my inherited cabin value based on her contributions to improving and maintaining the property. The demand letter cited her social media content as evidence that she'd enhanced the property's commercial value through marketing and promotional activities, and claimed she deserved compensation for unpaid labor in developing the location's business potential. Her lawyer's letter was professionally written but legally baseless, especially since she'd never contributed financially to property taxes, maintenance, utilities, or mortgage payments in 4 years. I forwarded the demands to my own attorney, who responded with documentation proving the cabin was inherited property that predated our relationship, plus evidence that Hazel's social media posts had actually been unauthorized commercial use of my property without permission or compensation. Then Derek's wife Miranda contacted me directly, and everything changed again. She'd apparently discovered Derek's affair through credit card statements showing expensive dinners and hotel charges during his supposed business trips, and she'd hired a private investigator who'd uncovered the entire scheme. Miranda had screenshots of Derek and Hazel's messages, photos of them together at restaurants and private clubs, and evidence that Derek had been funding Hazel's lifestyle while lying to both his wife and me about the nature of their relationship. "I thought you should know what kind of people you were dealing with," Miranda told me over the phone, her voice steady but furious. "My husband has been playing both sides of this situation, and your ex-girlfriend has been lying to everyone involved, including you." She offered to provide evidence for any legal proceedings and mentioned that Derek was now facing his own consequences at home, including potential divorce proceedings and questions about financial fraud related to using joint marital assets to fund his affair with Hazel. Miranda's revelations about Derek painted an even more disturbing picture of Hazel's behavior than I'd initially understood. According to the private investigator's report, Hazel had been posing as Derek's business partner at networking events and corporate functions, introducing herself to his colleagues and clients as his strategic marketing consultant, while secretly pursuing him romantically behind his wife's back. The investigation revealed that Derek had never actually invited Hazel to these events. She'd been using information from their text conversations to show up uninvited, then convincing security and event staff that she belonged there by mentioning specific details about Derek's business dealings. When Derek finally told her to stop attending his work functions, Hazel had escalated to showing up at his children's private school, claiming to be his business associate, and asking teachers about his family schedule under the pretense of coordinating meetings. School security footage showed her attempting to engage Derek's teenage daughter in conversation about her father's work schedule and home routine, which had prompted Derek to file harassment charges with Denver police. The breaking point came when Hazel tried to access Derek's private elevator at his downtown office building using a fake employee badge she'd somehow obtained, setting off security alarms and resulting in her being escorted from the building by corporate security. Video surveillance showed her arguing with guards and insisting she had every right to be there as Derek's partner in both business and life, completely contradicting her claims to me that Derek had been pursuing her for a mutual romantic relationship. Meanwhile, Penny was introducing me to Dr. Sarah Hoffman, her thesis advisor who specialized in wilderness therapy and trauma recovery programs. Dr. Hoffman was developing evidence-based treatments that combined traditional psychological approaches with outdoor experiences, and she was impressed by the practical applications I'd developed through years of teaching survival skills to veterans and at-risk youth groups. "Your methods align perfectly with what we're trying to achieve academically," Dr. Hoffman explained during our first meeting. "You're already doing instinctively what we're trying to prove scientifically. Would you be interested in consulting on our research program?" The consulting position offered both intellectual stimulation and additional income, plus the opportunity to help develop programs that could genuinely change lives. It felt like the kind of meaningful work I'd always wanted to do but hadn't known how to pursue, and it was happening because I'd connected with Penny after walking away from someone who'd never supported my professional aspirations. Hazel's response to learning about my new opportunities was to stage what she apparently considered a final grand gesture. She showed up at my cabin during a weekend client training session, arriving unannounced while I was teaching a group of corporate executives basic survival skills as part of their team-building retreat. She'd dressed in expensive outdoor gear that still had tags attached and marched into the middle of our fire-building lesson like she was making some kind of dramatic movie entrance. "Carter, we need to talk right now," she announced to the group of 12 surprised executives who'd paid substantial fees for an uninterrupted wilderness experience. "I'm tired of you hiding behind your fake girlfriend psychology student instead of dealing with our real relationship history." The executives looked between Hazel's obvious desperation and my completely calm reaction as I continued demonstrating proper kindling arrangement. "This is neither the time nor the place for personal conversations," I told her evenly. "These people paid for professional instruction, not relationship drama." "Professional instruction?" she laughed, but it sounded more like hysteria than amusement. "You're playing pretend outdoor man with people's money while refusing to acknowledge what we built together for 4 years." One of the executives, a woman who'd been taking careful notes during my demonstration, looked at Hazel with obvious disdain. "Ma'am, we're here for wilderness survival training, not whatever personal issues you're trying to resolve. Could you please respect our time and his workspace?" Hazel's confident entrance deflated as she realized that none of these successful professionals were impressed by her performance, and I wasn't going to abandon my responsibilities to engage with her drama. Hazel's increasingly desperate behavior reached criminal levels 2 weeks later when she began posting photos from my private social media accounts without permission, including images of my inherited family property and personal moments we'd shared during our relationship. She'd apparently screenshotted dozens of photos before I'd blocked her from all platforms, then began using them to create fake social media posts designed to make it appear we were still together and happy. Her Instagram stories showed our old vacation photos with new captions like, "Missing our mountain adventures," and "Some connections transcend temporary misunderstandings," while simultaneously posting LinkedIn content that described herself as co-founder of a successful wilderness therapy venture, using photos of my actual consulting work with Dr. Hoffman's research team. The digital harassment escalated when she created fake business profiles using my property photos and grandfather's vintage equipment, advertising wilderness retreats and survival courses that didn't exist while collecting deposits from unsuspecting customers who thought they were booking legitimate services. I discovered this when 3 different people contacted me directly asking about refunds for wilderness experiences they'd supposedly booked through Hazel's Mountain Adventures, a business that existed only in her imagination and criminal activity. My attorney filed charges for identity theft, digital harassment, and business fraud, which resulted in Hazel losing her marketing position permanently when her employer learned about the criminal complaints. Her supervisor told my lawyer that they couldn't maintain professional standards with an employee facing charges related to misuse of digital media and fraudulent business practices, which effectively ended her career in marketing and communications. But Hazel's family was starting to distance themselves from her behavior as well. Her mother Patricia and sister Brooklyn staged what they called an intervention at my workplace, arriving during a wilderness therapy session I was conducting with a group of military veterans dealing with PTSD recovery. Patricia had apparently driven up from Denver expecting to convince me to work things out with Hazel, but their plan backfired completely when they interrupted a deeply meaningful therapeutic process. "Excuse me, are you Carter?" Patricia asked, walking directly into our group circle where veterans were sharing vulnerable stories about their recovery journeys. "We need to discuss your relationship with my daughter." The veterans looked shocked at the intrusion, and I could see several of them tensing up as their therapeutic safe space was violated by strangers demanding personal information. Dr. Hoffman, who was observing the session for her research, immediately stood up to protect her participants. "Ma'am, this is a private therapeutic session," Dr. Hoffman said firmly. "You need to leave immediately or I'll call security." Patricia seemed to finally understand the gravity of what she'd interrupted when she looked around at the circle of veterans, some of whom were visibly distressed by the unexpected disruption. One participant, a Marine veteran named James, spoke up directly, "Lady, whatever personal drama you're dealing with, this isn't the place. We're here trying to heal from actual trauma." Brooklyn tried to salvage the situation by explaining they were just trying to help Carter understand how much Hazel loves him, but James cut her off with military directness. If she loved him, she wouldn't send her family to interrupt his work helping people who actually need it. Patricia apologized profusely to the group and immediately left with Brooklyn, but not before telling me privately that she was ashamed of Hazel's behavior and didn't realize how far this had gone. 2 days later, I received a joint bridal shower invitation addressed specifically to me, despite having no connection to the event or the couple involved. The invitation was for Derek and Miranda's vow renewal ceremony, clearly obtained through Hazel's continued stalking of Derek's family and sent to my address as some kind of psychological warfare designed to remind me that she was still obsessing over her previous relationship while claiming to want me back. I took a photo of the invitation and posted it to my social media with a caption about receiving mail clearly intended to harass rather than invite, then burned it in my fireplace while live-streaming one of my wilderness cooking tutorials. My followers found the whole situation both disturbing and amusing, with comments praising my peaceful response to what was obviously continued harassment and psychological manipulation. 6 months after the posted incident, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined while I was trapped in that relationship with Hazel. The wilderness therapy program I developed with Dr. Hoffman had helped 43 clients work through various trauma responses using evidence-based outdoor interventions, and our success rates were attracting attention from treatment centers across Colorado and neighboring states. My relationship with Penny had evolved into something I'd never experienced before. A genuine partnership where both people contributed equally and supported each other's growth rather than one person subsidizing the other's existence. She'd completed her thesis on nature-based trauma recovery and had been offered a position with the state mental health department, while I'd expanded my survival instruction business to include therapeutic consulting and corporate wellness programs. We were planning to combine our expertise into a formal business partnership that would offer comprehensive wilderness therapy services to a broader range of clients. But Hazel apparently wasn't finished trying to insert herself into my success story. Her final attempt at reconciliation involved hiring a private investigator to find what she called my weaknesses and pressure points that she could exploit to force me back into a relationship with her. The investigator she'd hired, a retired police detective named Frank Rodriguez, told me later that he'd never encountered a client with such disturbing motivations for surveillance services. According to Frank, Hazel had specifically requested information about my financial vulnerabilities, my relationship with Penny, and any illegal or unethical business practices she could use as leverage against me. She'd paid him $1,500 upfront and promised another $1,000 if he could find evidence that would destroy his new life, so he'd have to come back to me. Instead of finding weaknesses, Frank discovered my volunteer work teaching survival skills to at-risk youth through the County Juvenile Center, my partnerships with 3 veterans organizations, and my growing reputation as an ethical businessman who genuinely cared about his clients' well-being. Frank told me he'd been so impressed by what he'd learned that he'd refunded Hazel's money and told her he wouldn't continue surveillance on someone who's obviously a decent person being harassed by someone with serious psychological issues. The investigators' report apparently included recommendations that Hazel seek professional mental health treatment and consider relocating to a different state where she could start over without the constant temptation to obsess over her previous relationship. Frank had included documentation of her criminal charges, her family's growing distance from her behavior, and evidence that her continued fixation on me was preventing her from moving forward with her own life. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from Patricia apologizing again for Hazel's behavior and informing me that Hazel had finally moved to Arizona where she had distant relatives who'd agreed to help her restart her life away from Colorado. Patricia explained that Hazel had burned bridges with most of her professional contacts, lost touch with several longtime friends who were tired of hearing about her obsession with our failed relationship, and had finally accepted that her behavior had created permanent consequences she couldn't manipulate or escape. "She's lost almost everything she built here," Patricia told me sadly. "Her job, her friends, her reputation, even some family relationships. I think she finally understands that this all happened because of choices she made, not because anyone was unfair to her." The conversation ended with Patricia expressing genuine hope that Hazel would get the professional help she needed and find healthy ways to build new relationships, while acknowledging that the damage she'd done to herself and others couldn't be undone through apologies or good intentions. A month later, Penny and I were featured in a local magazine article about innovative approaches to mental health treatment, with photos of us leading a wilderness therapy session for combat veterans. The article described our collaborative approach and mentioned my background in survival instruction and Penny's academic expertise in trauma psychology, presenting us as an example of how different professional backgrounds could combine to create more effective treatment options.